haven, preserving the eternal annals of Warhammer.
The stars were dying, one by one, like candles beneath a storm no hand could calm. Across the void, the silence of the gods fell heavier than war. Nebulae once bright with life dimmed to ash, and the light of the galaxy's first empire, the empire of the Old Ones, flickered on the edge of extinction. Worlds cracked under their own memories, their oceans boiling away as if trying to forget the shape of creation itself. Among those who remained was Enthuril, last of the Shaper priests, whose hands had once guided the birth of suns and species. He stood now before the ruins of his laboratory, staring at a dying star reflected in his eyes, whispering words not meant for mortal throats. "If life must end," he murmured, "then let it end loudly." His voice vanished into the wind of space, unheard and unanswered. For the gods had gone silent. In those days the Citan hunted the living light itself. They fed on the hearts of stars, turning glory into hunger. The Necron legions marched without breath, each step a dirge across the bones of time. The Old Ones' creations, the Aldari, the Jokero, the Slan, were scattered, broken, or turned mad by grief. Only Enthuril remained at his post, a lonely figure tracing equations across the dust of his dying world. He refused to flee to the hidden dimensions where his kin hid. Cowardice was the death of divinity, and he would not die afraid. Yet something inside him trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of knowing he was about to unmake everything that made him what he was. For in the core of his temple, deep beneath cyclopean spires carved from fossilized suns, a new chamber had been built. Its walls pulsed with organic light, each vein carrying the promise of something vast. Inside floated 1,000 embryonic forms, half flesh, half fungus, bound in membranes of energy and instinct. He had named them the Krork, though his mind recoiled from the sound. They were meant to be warriors, protectors, but he could already feel the laughter sleeping in their genes. They were joy made into violence. He had mixed the endurance of fungus, the rage of beasts, and the cunning spark of the Eldari, all fused under the binding song of psychic unity. They would never tire. They would never doubt. They would fight forever. It was perfection through madness. He looked upon them and felt neither pride nor hope, only necessity. The galaxy was falling apart, and the gods no longer answered. Someone had to stand in their place. Someone had to fight for what remained of order. But as he watched the first Krork twitch within its cocoon, Enthuril saw something he had not planned for: emotion. A ripple of glee across a half-formed face, a pulse of amusement that should not exist. It smiled before it breathed. The Shaper froze. In that grin he glimpsed the truth of his own sin. The war had infected creation itself. Even joy was now a weapon. He turned away, his mind fracturing between devotion and despair. Outside the temple walls, the sky burned green where stars bled into the void. His instruments screamed in warning. The Citan were drawing near, devouring the last bastions of resistance. He knew he had hours, perhaps less. He could end the experiment now, purge the chambers, dissolve the embryonic horrors before they awoke. Yet his trembling hand hovered over the control rune and would not move. The Old Ones had failed because they had created life that feared death. The Krork would not. They would know nothing but survival. They would thrive where gods had perished. Still, doubt lingered like poison in his veins. To create without love was to invite hatred. To shape without balance was to summon ruin. He thought of his teachers, long gone, who once said that creation without compassion becomes tyranny. Perhaps tyranny is all that remains, he whispered, sealing the chamber with a gesture. Lightning burst from the spire above, striking the vault in a flare of emerald fire. The cocoons writhed, the ground trembled, and the universe held its breath. The first Krork opened its eyes. It screamed, not in pain, but in delight, its voice echoing like thunder through the vacuum of the world. Others followed, their roars overlapping into a single chorus of awakening. They tore through the membranes that held them and stood upright, massive and green, their skin gleaming like living iron. And Thural stepped back as they moved toward him, uncertain whether they recognized him as god or prey. Their laughter filled the air, raw, thunderous, unstoppable. They had not yet learned language, yet already they mocked the silence of heaven. The Shaper priest fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the sound. He realized he had built a species incapable of despair. They would not mourn the dead or fear the future. They would turn destruction into celebration. For them, loss would be another form of creation. It was brilliance beyond morality, survival beyond purpose. The old ones had sought balance. The Krork were balance's end. He knew then that even if they won the war, they would never stop fighting. They would wage war on eternity itself just to feel alive. A voice stirred within him, ancient and tender, perhaps his conscience, perhaps the last whisper of the gods. You have made something that cannot die, it said. But can they live? He did not answer. He watched the Krork scatter into the wasteland, smashing the ruins of his world for sport, their laughter echoing across the valley of extinction. He wanted to stop them, to teach them reverence, but the moment he stepped forward, one turned, tilting its head as if listening to an unheard rhythm. Then it grinned and moved on, already forgetting him. He was not their master. He was their first story, one they would never tell. Far above, the dying sun flared one last time, casting the temple in burning gold. And Thural stood alone amid the ashes, the hum of creation fading to silence. He realized that this was what immortality truly meant. Not endless life, but endless consequence. The Krork would survive the death of galaxies, but their laughter would outlive meaning. In time, they would forget their name, their maker, even their purpose. Yet their wars would echo forever. That was their gift and his curse. He walked to the edge of the temple and looked toward the black horizon, where the Satan devoured the light. For a moment, he thought he saw faces within the fire, mocking, radiant, indifferent. He whispered one final vow. May you choke on them. Then he opened the gates of the vault and released the Krork upon the stars. They poured forth in a tide of green flame, their ships grown from flesh and fungus, their roars shaking the void. The galaxy shuddered as they spread across it like laughter breaking through grief. And Thural watched until their lights vanished, and then, with the calm of one who has completed a sin too vast for forgiveness, he turned to the sky and closed his eyes. The stars continued to die, but somewhere amid that silence, a new sound was born, the echo of endless war disguised as joy. It spread from world to world, seed to seed, until the galaxy itself seemed to smile in defiance of death. It was the sound of life refusing to end, the laughter of gods remade in madness. We truly love and care for you, traveller of the stars. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now let's get started. In the age before memory, before even stars dared to burn too brightly, there were the laboratories of the old ones, vast sanctuaries of thought suspended between matter and dream. They were not places built, but grown, shaped by the will of gods who spoke in geometry and sung in creation's code. It was here, beneath cathedral domes of crystalline bone, that Enthural once believed in mercy. He remembered the warmth of his teachers' voices echoing across the corridors, the soft pulse of stars being born in containment fields. He remembered creating life that laughed without violence, beauty without purpose. Those days were gone. Now the halls trembled under the weight of a dying universe, and mercy was a language he no longer spoke. The Krork had been unleashed. Their spores drifted through void and ruin, blooming on worlds the Citan had stripped bare. Wherever they took root, the sound of war followed. Enthural watched from the broken spire of his temple as new battles erupted across the cosmos. The Necron phalanxes, once invincible, found themselves harried and outnumbered. The Krork did not strategize or plan. They simply were, an avalanche of will given form. Every death seeded another birth. Every victory multiplied itself. For the first time in centuries, the Necrons faltered. Yet even as triumph flickered like a dying sun in Enthural's heart, a deeper dread stirred beneath it. He had not created order. He had created momentum without end. Other Shaper priests contacted him through the dying warp lines, their signals frayed and desperate. They demanded answers. What had he done? The Krork's resonance was interfering with the webways, disrupting the sacred passages through which the old ones fled. The laughter of his creations echoed even in the hidden dimensions. "You have broken the lattice," one cried, her voice full of terror. "They are growing beyond their command structure. They do not hear us anymore." Enthural had no reply. He severed the link and stared into the endless void. He knew they were right, but he could not regret it. Not yet. He told himself the Krork were the price of survival, and that prices must always be paid in blood. To study them was to confront madness. His laboratory, once clean and ordered, now resembled the mind of a dying god, chaotic, cluttered with fragments of living data that refused to remain still. Holospheres pulsed with visions of green tides sweeping across worlds, waves of bodies devouring everything in sight. He traced their evolution. Their nervous systems restructured under pressure. Their bones thickened, their minds simplified into something terrifyingly efficient. They did not need hierarchy or instruction. Instinct replaced intelligence. Where one died, another grew stronger. They learned by surviving. They built weapons from memory. They called it fun. In his notes, Enthural wrote, "The Krork are a mistake that functions perfectly." Then he crossed the words out and wrote, "Perhaps the only truth left." On the 5th rotation after the fall of Igrath's sun, another old one arrived. Valoth, once his companion and rival, her essence flickering with exhaustion. She appeared not as light, but as shadow made aware. "You have damned us," she whispered. Her form trembled as though under immense gravity. "Do you even remember why we began? We shaped life to balance the warp and the material, to bind chaos to reason. And you..." Her voice broke into static grief. "You have built an echo of chaos itself." Enthural turned to her slowly. "And what have you built, Veloth?" "Cages for ghosts. The balance is gone. The gods have eaten it. They could have been reasoned with." "No," he said, stepping closer, the glow of the dying machinery flickering against his face. "They do not reason. They consume. You still think mercy is a weapon. It is only meat." Valoth's eyes dimmed. "Then you are no longer one of us." He did not answer. He watched as she turned to leave, her form dissolving into particles of light. When the last of her shimmer vanished, he felt a pain he had not allowed himself for millennia, a quiet ache that tasted like farewell. He had not only lost his kind, he had become something else entirely. Days passed in silence. The Krork multiplied beyond comprehension, spreading faster than thought. Their energy bled into the warp, warping it, stirring currents, unseen since the first dawn. And Thurl observed them from afar, measuring their psychic field. It resonated like laughter through the fabric of reality. Yet that laughter carried the cadence of his own voice, the echo of the song he had used to bind their genes. They were his reflection, and their joy was his punishment. One evening, if time still had meaning, he descended into the lowest chamber of his temple. There lay the archive of all Shaper blueprints, the histories of every species the Old Ones had ever birthed. He walked among them like a mourner through a graveyard of perfection. Here were the Aldari, their neural webs woven to channel emotion into art. Here were the Jokero, engineers of playful ingenuity. And here the Krork, still unfinished in the original schema. He ran his fingers over the etched runes that described their creation, designed for endurance, programmed for joy, immune to despair. He smiled bitterly. Immune to despair, he whispered, a mercy I was never given. Above him, the temple shook. Through the crystalline ceiling, he saw the sky ignite in viridian fire. A Krork horde had discovered his world. They descended in living ships shaped like beasts, their hulls pulsing with organic muscle and fungal glow. The ground split as they landed, shouting to one another in crude, booming sounds that carried more emotion than logic. For a brief, delirious moment, Thurl felt awe. They were magnificent, unstoppable, eternal, the perfect children of imperfection. He emerged from the temple's ruin as they swarmed across the plains, their footsteps shaking the bones of the planet. They noticed him almost immediately, though they could not understand what they saw. One approached, a giant with a face split by a grin, eyes bright with primitive delight. It studied him like a curious beast, head tilted, breath steaming in the cold air. And Thurl raised a trembling hand. "Do you know me?" he asked softly. The creature squinted, then laughed, a booming, innocent roar that seemed to fill the atmosphere itself. Others joined in until the world vibrated with it. And Thurl lowered his hand. He felt tears he did not know he still possessed. The laughter of his creations was both hymn and curse, the sound of eternity mocking its maker. Around him, the Krork tore apart the temple stones, fashioning weapons from sacred relics, building fortresses out of memory. He stood amid them like a forgotten statue, as the light of his life's work crumbled. He could have fled. He could have escaped through the webway and hidden like the others. But instead, he remained. He would witness what he had done. He would see what creation looked like when stripped of purpose. The Krork danced around the flames, celebrating nothing, fearing nothing, becoming the very chaos he once sought to contain. And in their joy, he found a terrible beauty, the realization that perhaps life's only truth was to outlast its meaning. As the night deepened and the sky turned the color of blood and emerald, and Thurl whispered to the void, "May you never stop laughing." The Krork's roars answered him, blending with the wind until the sound became indistinguishable from the voice of the dying stars. Somewhere in that vast symphony, the universe took a breath, and for the briefest instant, creation smiled again. The first wars of the Krork began without reason, as if violence itself had taken breath. Across shattered systems and hollow planets, green tides rolled through the void, laughing as they conquered. There was no strategy, no doctrine, only momentum pure, instinctive, and joyous. Where they fought, the ground cracked. Where they lingered, new spores took root in the blood-soaked soil, birthing more of their kind. From the black husks of dead suns to the crystalline ruins of old One temples, their laughter echoed like thunder through eternity. And Thurl watched from afar, drifting in the orbit of a dying world, his mind suspended between wonder and guilt. Every victory of the Krork felt like a prayer to a god that had never deserved worship. He recorded what he saw, though he no longer believed anyone would read it. The Krork adapt, his notes whispered through the static of failing machines. They fight as if their bodies remember wars I never taught them. Their blood grows hotter when spilled. They heal when wounded. Their madness is evolution given rhythm. The hollows flickered with scenes of impossible endurance. A Krork pulling itself from molten stone, laughing as its charred flesh regenerated. Others tearing into Necron constructs, ripping soul metal apart with bare hands. They did not fight for victory, but for the ecstasy of conflict. The Old Ones had engineered countless species, but none had ever smiled while dying. Yet even perfection carried its flaw. In their endless triumph, the Krork began turning upon one another. And Thurl saw it first on the crimson world of Velos Prime, where an entire horde, after eradicating the last Necron phalanx, began arguing over who had killed the most. The argument became a duel, the duel a massacre, the massacre a celebration. Within hours, half the horde lay dead, and the survivors roared with laughter, exalting the carnage as if it were sacred ritual. They have no enemies left, Enthrall whispered, so they make them. The revelation chilled him more than the cold of the stars. His creations were eternal not because they endured, but because they would never cease consuming. He drifted through the void in his craft, moving between ruins, collecting remnants of the Old One's fallen worlds. The webway was collapsing. Whole passages folded into the warp, leaving only darkness. The surviving Shapers had long since fled into dimensions beyond comprehension, leaving Enthrall as the last witness to his own disaster. His craft descended upon a world that once served as a cradle of life, a sphere of oceans turned to emerald mist, continents overrun by fungal jungles. The air shimmered with spores that pulsed like breathing light. He walked among them, each step sinking into living ground, the soil whispering laughter in a tongue he almost recognized. The planet itself had become an organism, and its pulse followed the rhythm of war. In the center of what had once been a city stood a monument carved by Krork hands, crude, colossal, depicting their kind locked in eternal combat. It was beautiful in its brutality. Enthrall reached out, tracing the lines of their faces. The sculpture's eyes glowed faintly green. He realized they had begun to make art, though they could not understand it. Perhaps instinct remembered what intellect had forgotten. Perhaps creation could not die, only change shape. He closed his eyes and saw, for a fleeting moment, the shadow of his teachers standing behind him, the chorus of their disappointment silent yet heavy. He returned to his ship as the horizon burned. The Krork had found him again. They came from the forests in a tide of roars and stomping feet, each one larger than before, their muscles swollen with the gifts of evolution. He did not flee this time. He watched as they surrounded his vessel, their eyes full of simple, radiant curiosity. The largest among them stepped forward, a beast whose armor was a patchwork of bone and scrap metal. It studied him for a long moment before speaking in a guttural approximation of language. "Yuda Shaper," it rumbled. Enthrall's voice trembled. Yes, he said, though he did not know if the word still meant anything. The creature grinned, revealing teeth like broken ivory. Good job, it said, and then struck him with the flat of its hand. He flew backward into the dirt, the impact breaking bones that refused to heal. Around him, the Krork howled with laughter. They were not cruel. They simply found joy in the act. As his vision blurred, he heard them chanting, repeating sounds like music, "Shape her, shape her," until the air itself quaked. For a brief moment, it felt almost like reverence, though he knew better. Reverence was a concept too still for such creatures. What they offered was recognition, the only form of love they could give. When he awoke, the Krork were gone, leaving only the ruins of his ship. He lay among the ashes, his body failing, his mind fraying. He thought of the stars collapsing into silence, of the old one's arrogance, of the laughter of things that could never die. "You have inherited the universe," he whispered to the emptiness. "Do not waste it as we did." But even as he spoke, he knew they could not understand. The Krork had no gods, no sins, no prayers. Their existence was pure momentum, and perhaps that was what immortality truly demanded, the surrender of meaning for the sake of continuation. He spent the last of his strength recording a final entry. "The Krork will outlast us all. They will forget us. They will forget themselves, but they will never stop. One day, they will look at the stars and wonder who built them, and they will laugh, and the universe will laugh with them. That is the legacy of the old ones." He smiled weakly, the edges of his vision darkening like closing wings. The spores rose around him, glowing softly, and for a moment he thought he saw faces in the mist, his own creations, watching him with something that resembled sorrow. Then the wind took him, scattering his body into the soil. Centuries later, that soil would birth new Krork, stronger, louder, even less burdened by thought. They would inherit his bones without knowing it, build their weapons from the metal of his ship, and carve new idols from the remnants of his monument. They would name them without memory and laugh as they did so. In their laughter, his spirit would echo, not as wisdom, but as rhythm. And in that rhythm, the galaxy would find its next heartbeat, endless and mad. The stars dimmed further, but the sound of war grew brighter, pulsing through the void like a drumbeat. Only the living could hear. It was not the sound of ending, but of continuation, a hymn written in noise and blood. From the silence of gods came the symphony of beasts, and Enthural's legacy sang on, louder than divinity, freer than eternity. The last light of the old ones dimmed beneath the green storm. Across the ruins of the galaxy, their temples cracked open like eggshells under the weight of their own forgotten promises. The Krork, swollen with triumph and ignorance, spread like laughter through dying worlds. Their war was not conquest, it was breathing. Their joy was the rhythm of collapse. Yet in one forgotten vault of crystal and bone, a single figure still remained, Enthural, or what was left of him. His form was no longer divine, nor entirely alive. The years had melted his body into a lattice of sinew and memory, his mind tethered to the machines that hummed weakly around him. He had outlived his purpose, his species, and perhaps even time. The laughter of his creations reached him faintly through the planetary crust, a low thunder that mocked eternity. He no longer remembered when he had sealed the vault. Perhaps to protect himself, perhaps to preserve the data of the past. But in the silence, he had begun speaking to the walls, as if they were witnesses to his unraveling thoughts. "They are beautiful," he said to the dead machines. "Beautiful because they are wrong." His voice cracked like rust. He played back fragments of the old recordings. The moment the Krork first laughed, the first world they conquered, the first time they turned against themselves. Each sound filled him with the same bitter awe. Creation was no longer art. It was echo. It was repetition without end. The vault trembled. Through the cracks in the stone above, light poured down, green and pulsating. He knew what that meant. They had found him again. He rose slowly, dragging his half-mechanical body toward the control dais. Around him, the archives flickered to life. Projections of old won cities, serene and untouched, shimmering like ghosts of a world that never existed. "You told us," he whispered to their flickering faces. "That creation was sacred. That balance was everything. You did not warn us that balance dies faster than love." The projections did not answer. They had long since turned to silence. Only the hum of the dying vault remained. The first of the Krork broke through the surface with a roar, their massive forms bursting through the ground like the roots of some monstrous tree. Dust cascaded from the ceiling as they descended, eyes glowing with the feral joy of discovery. They were larger than before, taller than any Necron construct, broader than the war machines of the Citan. Their skin shimmered with the faint sheen of evolution, each generation stronger, louder, less aware of its beginning. They had come not to kill, but to play. To them, everything was play. And Thurl watched as they approached, their footfalls shaking the ancient foundations. He felt no fear. His existence had become an experiment observing itself. One of them, a massive brute with tusks curved like horns, stepped forward. Its voice echoed through the chamber like an avalanche. "Old thing," it growled. "You built the fights." The words were crude, fractured, but intelligible. And Thurl lifted his head. "I built the world," he said softly. "And you devoured it." The Krork grinned, a grin too wide, too alive. "Good world," it said. "Plenty to smash, plenty to burn." The others laughed, pounding their fists against their chests, the sound reverberating through the stone. He felt something stir inside him, an emotion he could not name. Pride, grief, admiration, hatred, all indistinguishable now. "Do you know what you are?" he asked. The brute tilted its head. "We's the best," it declared, as though announcing a truth the stars already knew. "We fight, we live, we fight again," Nuff said. The simplicity of it made Enthurl's circuits ache. He wanted to tell them of the cosmos, of the gods, of the delicate threads that once bound existence together. But he knew they would not listen. They had transcended comprehension, and in doing so, they had become perfect. When the Krork grew bored, they began to tear apart the vault. They smashed the memory chambers, shattered the crystalline archives, and ripped the ancient machines from the walls. Enthurl watched without resistance. Each fragment that broke released a pulse of light, carrying with it a whisper of history, songs of creation, hymns of balance, the laughter of the first stars. The Krork ignored them all. To them, light was only fire, and fire was joy. One of the smaller ones found the remains of a stasis pod, within which floated the preserved form of a long-dead old one. It poked at the glass, then crushed it in its hand, roaring with delight as the body inside disintegrated into dust. The others cheered, and Thorol looked upon the ashes and felt nothing. His grief had burned out eons ago. "You have finished your task," he whispered to the dust. "We built eternity, and it devoured us." When they were done, the Krork began to fight among themselves, hurling slabs of broken architecture at one another, each blow followed by laughter. The chamber shook with their chaos. And Thurol stood in the center of it all, unmoving, like a prophet forgotten by his own scriptures. In a moment of strange calm, he reached into the core of the vault and activated the last functioning system, a hololithic recorder, projecting his thoughts across the warp. His voice filled the chamber and the space beyond. "To whatever gods remain," he said, "know this. We are not punished for our arrogance. We are rewarded by it. The Krork are our perfection, stripped of wisdom, purified by ignorance. They will outlive every empire, every star, every dream." The Krork paused, listening. The sound of his voice carried a weight they could not understand, but they felt it all the same. A strange stillness fell. Then the largest of them stepped forward and placed a massive hand on the remnants of the dais. "Good talk," it said solemnly, as if approving a war plan. Then it smashed the console to fragments. The light went out. Darkness swallowed the vault, broken only by the rhythmic glow of green eyes and the echo of laughter fading into the tunnels above. And Thurl slumped to the floor. His systems flickered, his mind fracturing into scattered thoughts. Somewhere deep within, he felt a pulse, a distant hum, ancient and vast. Perhaps the last remnants of his consciousness escaping into the warp. He imagined that pulse spreading, embedding itself in the minds of his creations, carried unknowingly in their collective memory. He imagined it becoming a seed, one that would one day awaken as legend. As the final structure collapsed around him, he whispered to the void, "Let my name be forgotten. Let my sin live forever." The roof gave way, and light returned, a furious, endless green. The Krork roared as the world split open beneath them, their joy swallowing the last echo of civilization. From the rubble, rose spores carried on the wind, drifting between the stars, searching for new worlds to infect. And in that roaring chaos, the last voice of the old ones dissolved into myth. And Thurl was gone, but his laughter, reflected, corrupted, reborn, lived on in every breath of the Krork. The age of creation had ended. The age of the green gods had begun. Time moved differently after the old ones vanished. Whole millennia passed between breaths of the dying suns, yet to the Krork there was no measure of time, only the sound of battle echoing through the dark. The galaxy slept uneasily beneath their laughter. They spread without thought, their spores drifting across space like pollen from some terrible flower. Wherever they landed, life began again in the only way they understood, through war. Planets once sacred to the gods became their playgrounds. The ruins of the old ones became fortresses. Their monuments turned into thrones of scrap and bone. From the ashes of creation, a new rhythm took hold, a rhythm of endless conflict, pulsing through the void like a heartbeat that refused to stop. On the world that would one day be called Daggorath, a single spore took root in a crater filled with the bones of a shattered moon. The soil glowed faintly green, alive with residual energy from wars long forgotten. From that light rose the first Ork, not as mighty as his ancestors, not as vast as the Krork, but more cunning, more adaptable. He blinked under the newborn sun, scratched his head, and laughed. It was not the laughter of triumph, but of recognition, as if he already understood that destruction was simply another form of creation. Others followed, growing from the ground like weeds, their minds empty yet strangely content. They began to build things without knowing why, crude huts, weapons, engines made from the metal bones of the world. They fought not for power, but for joy, and their laughter filled the silence left by gods. Across the stars, the pattern repeated. Worlds once scoured clean of life became green again, alive with war and noise. The Krork were gone, dissolved by the weight of their own might. but fragments of them survived in these new children. Smaller, simpler, yet infinite. The Orks. Their spores carried the genetic memory of the ancient wars, their instincts guiding them toward violence as naturally as gravity pulls light. They did not question their purpose. They did not seek their origin. They simply lived, and living meant fighting. In their blood still hummed the echo of Entheral's voice, though it was buried under eons of laughter. On Daggerath, the first tribes formed. They gathered around the loudest, the strongest, the ones whose roars could shake the stones. Among them was one who seemed different, smarter, though not by much. His name was Grok, and when he spoke, others listened, though none could say why. He claimed that the noise of war pleased dusk-eye voices, invisible beings that watched from above. When thunder rolled across the plains, the Orks believed it was their gods laughing with them. They named them Gork and Mork, though no one could decide which was which. Grok told them it didn't matter. One's da mean one, he said, and da others da clever one. They both us. The others cheered, and so their theology was born, not from revelation, but from instinct, from the lingering psychic echo of the Krork's forgotten joy. Generations passed, though the Orks had no word for generations. They simply were, multiplying across the surface of the world, building crude machines that defied logic. Their tools worked because they believed they should. Their ships flew because they knew no reason why they couldn't. The galaxy began to hum again with green energy, a chorus of unconscious faith that filled the warp with a new kind of power, the power of collective madness. And far away, in the cold void between stars, ancient things stirred in their tombs, recognizing the song. In the crypt worlds of the Necrons, the slumbering minds of old warriors flickered awake. Their sensors detected the rising psychic storm, vast and chaotic, pulsing with the rhythm of primitive thought. They remembered it from before, the sound that had once heralded the fall of empires, the laughter of the Krork. Panic spread through machine minds that had forgotten fear. Orders rippled through the tomb networks. Awaken, mobilize, prepare. The galaxy was not done with war. Back on Daggerath, Grok stood on a mountain of scrap, gazing at the horizon. His people were fighting again, as they always did. But tonight something in the air felt different. The wind carried voices, faint but distinct, whispering through the clouds. They were not words, not exactly, more like feelings, vibrations that settled into the bones. He felt them in his skull, in his teeth, in the metal of his axe. He smiled. "Day's watching us," he muttered, "and Day's happy." Lightning split the sky, and for a heartbeat, the clouds took shape. Two colossal faces of green flame grinning down at him. The others saw it too, and roared with delight. They believed, and in their belief, something vast and ancient stirred within the warp. For the first time since the death of the old ones, the immaterial bled into the real. The collective thought of billions of Orks shaped the warp into form. Two presences emerged, laughing, wrestling, echoing through the immaterium. They were not gods as the old ones had known them. They were ideas made flesh, war-given consciousness, Gork and Mork, born not of divinity but of persistence, of laughter that refused to die. Their emergence sent ripples through the fabric of existence, felt by every species attuned to the warp. The Eldari wept, sensing the birth of a madness they could never control. The Necrons screamed without lungs. The stars themselves seemed to shudder as reality made room for new gods. And yet, for the Orks, nothing changed. They did not pray or build temples. They simply shouted louder, fought harder, and painted their skin in brighter greens. Their faith was not devotion, it was momentum. Every fight, every laugh, every act of chaos fed their gods, who in turn fed them. It was a perfect cycle of creation through destruction. From a distance, had there been any left to watch, one might have seen the pattern repeating across the galaxy. The spores spreading, the laughter rising, the skies darkening with psychic storms. Enthural's legacy had not died with him. It had merely shed its skin. The Krork were gone, but their essence lived on in the Orks. Smaller, simpler, but immortal in ways the Old Ones could never understand. They were life freed from reason, evolution released from purpose. They were the universe's last joke, and the joke was on everything that tried to end. And as another sun burned out, its light swallowed by green storms, the galaxy learned once again that laughter, once born, could never be silenced. The galaxy turned beneath green storms, its stars burning low and uncertain, like dying candles in a room filled with laughter. The age of the Old Ones had ended, but something in their echo still lingered. On worlds once scorched bare, the Orks thrived. They filled the silence with noise, war, joy, and chaos that spread like wildfire through the dark. Their laughter carried across the warp, awakening things long thought dead, confusing the gods of old faiths, and shaking the quiet of the machine tombs. It was not a laughter of innocence, but of endurance, the same sound that had once terrified the Citan. The galaxy was alive again, but its heart now beat to a savage rhythm. On a forgotten world, at the edge of a dying nebula, where the soil glowed faintly from ancient wars, an Ork unlike the others began to dream. His name was Graka. He was a shaman of sorts, though he did not know the word. He spoke to storms and heard them answer. When he slept, visions came, green suns rising, voices murmuring through light. At first, he thought it was the usual noise of battle echoing in his skull. But then the dreams began to speak words. The voice was old and weary, shaped by knowledge that should have died eons ago. "Do you hear me?" it asked through the static of the warp. "Do you remember?" Graka laughed in his sleep, thinking it was just the gods playing tricks, but the voice persisted. It called him by a name he did not understand. Child of Enthural. The name meant nothing to him, yet it filled his mind with strange images. Tall beings of light, worlds made of glass, laughter that was not born of war. He awoke shivering under the double moons, his skin buzzing with energy. Around him, the tribe slept, their bodies sprawled across the ruins of an old fortress built by hands that no Ork could imagine. He walked among the sleeping forms, touching the stones, feeling something beneath the surface. Memory buried in the rock. The air seemed alive, whispering in a language older than words. For the first time in Ork history, silence frightened one of them. The next day, Graka spoke of his dreams. The others mocked him at first. "Dreams ain't real," said a hulking knob, sharpening his blade. "They're only real things fighting." But Graka only grinned. "Maybe fighting came from a dream," he said, his eyes glowing faintly green. The others didn't understand, but something in his tone unsettled them. His words spread through the camp like a fungus, infecting minds that were never meant to think too deeply. That night, others dreamed too. They saw the same lights, the same echoing voice. "Remember what you were made for," it whispered. "You were the last hope. You were meant to save." None of them knew what save meant, but it sounded important. By the third night, the entire tribe gathered around Graka, drawn by a feeling they couldn't name. He began to carve strange shapes into the stone floor of the fortress. circles, spirals, and symbols that glowed faintly in the dark. "The voice told me," he muttered. "It's the way to the stars." The orcs watched in fascination, their primitive minds trying to piece together meaning. To them, it looked like art, though they didn't know the word for that either. They began adding their own marks, laughing and arguing, until the ruins were covered in glowing carvings. The light spread like veins of emerald fire across the walls. Above them, the sky flickered, the warp itself responding to their thoughts. Something ancient stirred in that moment. Far beyond the reach of their crude world, the remnants of Enthural's consciousness, scattered across the warp like dust, recognized the psychic resonance. His creation was remembering him. The fragments of his mind began to coalesce, drawn toward the source like embers to a flame. Through Graka's dreams, through the laughter of the tribe, the last thoughts of the Old One began to live again. He did not awaken as a god or ghost, but as an echo, a whisper bound to the psychic storm of orc belief. "You hear me, my children," it said through the warp, "but you will never understand." As the nights passed, Graka's visions grew clearer. He saw the fall of the Old Ones, the creation of the Krork, and the birth of the gods of war. He saw the moment when laughter became prophecy. When he awoke, he tried to explain it, but the words tangled on his tongue. The orcs only half listened, distracted by the promise of new battles. Yet some part of them felt what he could not say. A strange unity grew among them, an instinct older than their rage. For a brief span of cosmic time, they stopped fighting each other. They began building something together, though none of them knew what. Towers of stone and scrap rose across the plains, forming spirals visible from orbit. They said it made the sky louder, and that was reason enough. But harmony, even accidental, could not last. From another continent came a war band led by Skarog, a warlord whose laughter could shatter mountains. He saw the lights in the sky and declared them a challenge. When his fleet landed, the air trembled with the roar of engines and prophecy. Graka met him at the gates of the stone city. "This ain't a fight," Graka said, though his hands itched for it. "This is something else. We's remembering something." Skarog grinned. "If it don't end in fighting, then it don't matter." His words carried the weight of truth, for in the orc heart, battle was prayer. The two clashed beneath a sky boiling with green lightning. Every blow they struck sent shockwaves through the warp, the laughter of the gods echoing louder and louder. Around them, the tribes joined in, the plains turning into a storm of chaos. Yet as they fought, the carvings beneath the city began to glow brighter, drawing energy from their violence. The air screamed with psychic pressure. The ruins shook. Somewhere in the warp, something ancient and broken screamed back. Graka's last vision came as the city burned. He saw Enthural, not as god or ghost, but as an idea reflected in the fire. "You were meant to survive," the voice said. "You were the last seed of creation. You are proof that even chaos remembers its maker." Then the light vanished. The city collapsed into green flame, the carvings consumed by energy too vast for mortal minds. When the dust settled, only laughter remained. From the ashes, new spores rose into the wind, carrying the memory of Graka's visions across the stars. None would remember his name, but some part of him would live in every orc that dreamed. And though they would never know why, every time they built something that reached toward the sky, the warp would hum with faint echoes of an old one's voice, whispering from eternity, "Remember me through your noise." The plains of Daggorath were quiet now. but only in the way a storm pauses before tearing the sky apart again. The ruins of Graka's city lay beneath layers of ash, glowing faintly in the dark like embers that refuse to die. The laughter had ended weeks ago, or perhaps centuries. Time was meaningless on a world where memory and instinct lived side by side. The orcs who survived wandered among the wreckage, sniffing the air as though they could still smell the battle. Their gods had laughed through them that night, and something inside them had changed. The echo of Enthurl's voice still drifted through their collective mind, fragmented, misremembered, reshaped. Words turned into rhythm. Rhythm became a chant. "We's the chosen," they said, without knowing why. "We was made for the fight." Among the scattered tribes, Skarog the warlord lived still, though burned and scarred. His jaw was rebuilt from metal and bone, his armor fused into his skin. He no longer laughed. When his warriors asked why, he told them laughter was for the weak who didn't understand its meaning. "We don't laugh no more," he said. "We remember." But remembering was dangerous for creatures not built to think. Night after night, visions tormented him. Dreams of a green star pulsing in the void, calling his name with the voice of thunder. In its light, he saw the silhouette of Graka, or something like him, pointing toward the heavens. "That truth's up there," the ghost whispered. "Find the green light. Find where we came from." He awoke roaring, his rage shaking the camp. "There's a place up there," he growled to his lieutenants. "Something made us, and I'm gonna punch it." The tribe cheered, though none understood what he meant. Within days, they began gathering materials, scrap metal, broken engines, chunks of old ruins, and building ships that should not have flown. Yet they did, powered by belief alone. Orcs hammered and shouted, painting glyphs of fire and laughter across the hulls. The sound of construction became music, a hymn to a god they didn't know existed. When the first engines roared to life, the sky itself seemed to shudder. As the fleet rose through the atmosphere, the world below caught fire. Spores scattered into the wind, promising new life elsewhere. The stars blinked awake to witness the absurd miracle, a horde of half-living machines propelled by faith and noise. Skarog stood at the prow of his flagship, his one good eye burning with green light. "There it is," he murmured as the void opened before him. The nebula of his dreams shimmered ahead, a vast spiral of emerald energy pulsing like a heartbeat. He didn't know it, but he was flying toward the remnants of Enthurl's vault, the last cradle of the Old One's work, hidden in the shadow of a dead sun. When they entered the nebula, the laughter began again. It came not from the orcs, but from the space around them, a deep, echoing sound that vibrated through their bones. Some clutched their heads, others laughed back, unable to help themselves. "The star's talking," one shouted. "It likes us." Skarog silenced them with a roar. "It's calling me," he said, and for the first time his voice trembled. He ordered the fleet to halt. The nebula's center burned brighter, and within it they saw the outline of something vast, an ancient structure, part temple, part machine, suspended in the glow like a seed frozen in time. The ships drifted closer, drawn by unseen gravity. As they neared the surface, glyphs flickered to life across the hull, symbols of the Old Ones, untouched for 1 billion years. The orcs did not understand them, but their minds pulsed with recognition. Memory stirred, buried deep in their genes. They had seen these markings before, long before thought, when laughter first echoed across the stars. Skarog descended onto the structure with his warriors, their boots clanging against stone that had not been touched since creation's fall. The air tasted of ozone and memory. He felt the hum of power beneath his feet, and for the first time he wondered if war had an end. They found a chamber at the heart of the vault, a great sphere of living metal, half broken yet still breathing with light. Inside floated a figure of crystal and shadow, a shape neither alive nor dead. It spoke not with voice, but with resonance, vibrating through their skulls. "Welcome home." The orcs froze. Skarog stared, his mouth open. "Who are you?" he demanded. The figure pulsed. "The one who made your kind." The warlord laughed, though the sound came out broken. "You? Nah, we made ourselves. We fight. We win. That's who we are." The figure's light dimmed, as though sighing. "You were meant to protect creation from death. You were meant to save." The words echoed through the chamber, sinking into minds too simple to grasp them. Yet the energy in the air shifted. Some of the orcs began to grow restless, uncertain. Skarog snarled, "Save. We don't save nothing. We break it." The figure flickered, its voice filled with sorrow. "Then I failed." The light expanded suddenly, wrapping around the chamber. Images filled the air, the war in heaven, the fall of the old ones, the birth of the Krork. The orcs saw themselves as they once were, giants of endless power, laughing amid the stars. They saw Enthural's face, tired and defiant. "You were my last hope," he said, his voice carried on the projection, "and my greatest sin." Something inside Skarog cracked. He stepped forward, swinging his massive claw. "Don't tell me what I am," he roared, smashing the crystal figure. The chamber exploded in green fire. Shards of light rained down, searing into the flesh of every orc present. They screamed, not in pain, but in ecstasy. The psychic energy released by Enthural's dying echo poured into them, fusing their laughter with the warp. The vault trembled, collapsing inward as the nebula flared brighter than a sun. When the light faded, Skarog stood alone among ruins. The voice was gone, but something lingered within him. A pulse that matched the beating of distant stars. He looked at his hands and saw them glowing faintly, veins of light threading through his skin. Around him, the orcs began to rise, changed. Their eyes burned with a new kind of madness, deeper and older. "We killed the voice," one said. "Now Darstars belong to us." Skarog grinned, his laughter returning at last, louder than ever. "That's right," he said. "No more gods, no more makers. We's the only thing that lasts." He turned to the horizon, where the nebula was tearing itself apart. "Let's go make the galaxy loud again." The orcs roared in unison, their voices merging into one immense cry that rippled through the warp. Across 1,000 worlds, other orcs heard it and laughed without knowing why. And in that laughter, the echo of Enthural finally died, leaving behind only noise, pure, eternal, and alive. The tomb world stirred. Deep beneath its glassy plains, engines older than time whispered themselves awake, their gears grinding through silence thicker than centuries. Sensors, dead for millennia, began to glow, registering movement across the stars. The Necrons had slept through ages of dust and war, indifferent to the chaos that had followed the war in heaven. But now, the hum of green energy rippled through the void, carrying with it a sound they could never forget. The laughter of the Krork, reborn in the voices of their descendants. The orcs were everywhere, their battles shaking the warp itself, their psychic field expanding like a disease. To the Necrons, it was the same infection that had once undone their gods. The machines of eternity began to stir in defense, driven not by anger, but by memory. On the surface, light fractured across the black horizon as the first tomb opened. The Necron overlord Akhetraz emerged, his metallic frame gleaming with ancient glyphs of conquest. His eyes burned a cold jade fire as he surveyed the horizon. Where once there had been silence, now came the echo of drums, primitive, organic, and maddening. His warriors rose behind him in perfect formation, their movements devoid of breath or sound. "They are awake again," Akhetraz said, his voice a grinding harmony. "The mistake of the gods repeats itself." His lieutenant, a Lichguard of silvered bone, inclined his head. "Shall we purge the infection?" Akhetraz did not answer immediately. He gazed upward, watching the atmosphere shimmer with spores. "No," he said at last. "We will remind them what death means." In orbit, an Ork hulk drifted lazily, its engines roaring without rhythm, powered by belief more than fuel. Inside, 1,000 greenskins shouted, argued, and fought, oblivious to the world below. Skarog stood among them, restless. Since destroying the voice of his maker, he had been haunted by silence. It was unnatural for him, unbearable. His laughter came forced now, hollow. The others noticed but said nothing. A war boss's moods were storms best weathered. He stared out the viewport at the world beneath. Something in its stillness taunted him. "Too quiet," he muttered. "Needs waking up." The Necrons struck first. From the planet's surface rose beams of emerald fire, slicing through the void and tearing holes through the Ork fleet. Ships erupted in blossoms of flame and debris, yet from each explosion more spores scattered. The Orks roared, thrilled by the attack. "They started it," someone bellowed. "That means we can finish it." Skarog grinned, his hunger for noise returning. "Get the dropships ready," he ordered. "We's going down there." The battle began as all Ork wars did, with chaos mistaken for strategy. They fell from the sky in burning pods, roaring and laughing as they smashed into the tomb world. The ground split beneath their impact, ancient catacombs exposed to the poisoned air. From those depths, the Necrons marched in precise lines, their gorse weapons hissing like serpents. The air filled with green light and blood. The Orks met them with axes and shouts, shrugging off vaporized limbs as if inconvenience were glory. The battlefield became a clash of philosophies, silence against sound, order against joy. Akhetraz moved through the chaos like a blade through smoke. He was calm, methodical, his war scythe singing with every stroke. For every Ork he felled, 2 more rose from spores already taking root in the soil. He realized then what Enthuril had once understood too late. These creatures could not die in any way that mattered. Even their extinction was merely a seed. The galaxy had found its new form of immortality, one that mocked logic and law. Skarog, covered in dust and blood, spotted the Overlord through the haze of war. The Necron's cold composure enraged him. "You the one that woke up this rock," he shouted, charging through a line of warriors. "Good. Now I got something to hit that might hit back." Akhetraz turned, his gaze impassive. "You are not life," he said as Skarog swung his claw. "You are entropy given laughter." Their clash shook the field. Metal met muscle. Fire met silence. Around them, Orks and Necrons tore each other apart in endless repetition, both too stubborn to yield. As they fought, the ground beneath them cracked open, revealing the vaults of the Old Ones buried deep below. Energy pulsed upward, a remnant of forgotten creation still thrumming faintly in the stone. Both warriors felt it, something ancient stirring again. The light rose like a breath through the fissures, illuminating the battlefield. Every Ork paused, staring. The light was green, familiar, comforting in its madness. Skarog grinned. "It's laughing again," he whispered. Aketra stepped back, realization dawning too late. The planet itself had become an echo chamber of the Krork's ancient joy. The spores had infected the tombs, feeding on the machinery that once bound death to order. The laughter grew louder, not from mouths but from the warp itself, vibrating through metal and stone. The sky fractured. Reality folded. Orks screamed in ecstasy. Necrons screamed without sound as their circuits overloaded. Skarog raised his arms to the heavens, laughing until his voice became part of the noise. Aketraz fell to his knees, staring at the rising storm. "It never ends," he said, and then the light consumed him. From orbit, the tomb world was seen blooming, its surface splitting open like a flower of fire. A wave of green energy rolled outward, scattering spores into space, carrying with them the remnants of every mind that had ever fought there. When it was over, nothing remained but debris and laughter fading into the void. Yet even that fading was only temporary. Somewhere beyond the veil, the warp rippled again, feeding on the joy of chaos, birthing something new. The war was over, and yet, as always, it had only just begun. The galaxy drifted through an age of green storms. The aftermath of Daggerath's destruction rippled outward for millennia, scattering spores through the void like pollen from an immortal bloom. Entire systems awoke to new life overnight, planets once silent now roaring with crude laughter as orcs spawned from the soil and air. Every war zone became a cradle. Every grave became a seed. The laughter of Skarog and his kind had entered the warp itself, and the warp responded in kind, echoing that mirth back through every world that could still bleed. The orcs had become more than flesh. They were a rhythm, a pulse threaded through reality. On a forgotten moon circling a shattered gas giant, a mech boy named Dregger tinkered under the light of a dying sun. He was smaller than most, but his mind hummed with strange energy. He had visions that came to him during thunder, images of stars burning green, of vast machines sleeping beneath black stone. In those dreams, he saw something glimmering, a star that called to him, promising endless fight, endless noise. "The green star," he muttered one night, tightening bolts on a half-dead engine. "It's waiting for us." The others laughed, but the word spread. Soon, every war band across the sector whispered about it. Somewhere in the void, they said, there was a star made just for orcs. Whoever found it would never stop fighting again. It began as rumor, but rumor to an orc was prophecy. Across countless worlds, warlords lifted their heads to the sky and felt something pulling at them, a tug older than thought. They built ships in the image of their madness, powered by faith and gunpowder, by the memory of creation they had long forgotten. They painted symbols of the green star across their hulls and set out into the dark. The fleets grew by accident. Every passing warband joined in without question. They followed the call, shouting across the void, their engines singing in chaotic unison. Space itself trembled under their passage. Dregger's moon became the heart of it all. From every corner of the stars, orcs gathered there, building a city that grew from scrap and war machines. They called it Krorka Prime, though none remembered why the name felt sacred. Towers of rusted metal rose toward the heavens, pulsing with psychic light. Their ships circled above like insects around a flame. Dregger stood at the center, his eyes glowing with the same light that haunted Entheril long ago. "It's out there," he said to no one and everyone. "The thing what made us. I can feel it laughing." His hand trembled as he pointed to the stars. "We's gonna find it. For years, or perhaps minutes, for time meant nothing in the storm, they searched. Whole fleets vanished into warp rifts. Others reappeared centuries later unchanged. The laughter never ceased. The Orks didn't mind. For them, every battle along the way was proof they were getting closer. And in a sense, they were. For somewhere in the void, drawn by their noise, the remnants of Enthural's essence still drifted, fragmented, scattered through the warp like ash. Each time an Ork thought of the green star, those fragments stirred, gathering, reforming, pulled together by the weight of belief. Then, one day, the sky changed. The void ahead shimmered, not with light, but with laughter. It vibrated through the ships, through the bones of every Ork aboard. They saw it, the green star. It pulsed like a living heart, wrapped in storms of emerald fire. It was not a sun, but a wound in space itself, a portal where the warp bled into the material world. The fleets cheered. "There it is," they roared. "The fighting star." Dregger stood before the viewport of his ship, tears of joy cutting paths through the grime on his face. "It's beautiful," he whispered, unaware that he was speaking with Enthural's voice. They entered the storm. Ships disintegrated on contact, torn apart by forces older than light, yet the Orks laughed as they died, because dying meant getting closer. Those who survived found themselves drifting within the heart of the storm, where shapes moved in the green haze. Massive, indistinct, like titans carved from thought. They looked familiar somehow, reflections of something long buried. Dregger understood without knowing how. These were memories, echoes of the Krork, their ancient selves. He reached out a hand toward one of the shadows. It turned, and for a moment, he thought he saw Enthural's face behind the green glow, smiling. The storm spoke then, its voice a chorus of every Ork who had ever lived. "You never left us," it said. "You never died." The ships trembled as the warp and the material intertwined. Energy surged through the Orks, binding them in one vast consciousness. Every scream, every laugh, every instinct fused into a single mind. For the first time since creation, they were one again. They saw themselves as the Krork had been. Giants of endless war, unbound by logic or death. The green star flared brighter, feeding on their unity. Dregger fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the vision. He saw everything, the birth of his species, the fall of the old ones, the laughter that had become the universe's heartbeat. "We is the gods now," he whispered. Around him, the others howled in agreement. They were no longer separate beings. The Orks, the Krork, the echo of Enthural. All had merged into something greater, a living storm of will and memory. The green star pulsed one final time, then exploded outward, sending ripples of light through the galaxy. When it faded, the fleets were gone. In their place drifted a new constellation, a cluster of glowing green worlds arranged in the rough shape of a grin. The galaxy turned beneath its light, uneasy but alive, and across every battlefield, every wasteland, every dark corner of space, Orks everywhere felt the hum of that laughter returning to them, eternal and unstoppable. The universe exhaled. Creation laughed again. The green star burned for 10,000 years. Its light swept through nebulae and tomb worlds, seeping into the cracks of reality itself. Where its glow touched, life erupted, loud, violent and green. The Orks called it the Big Laugh, believing it to be the face of their gods smiling down upon them. The scholars of other races, those few who dared to study it, called it something else, the echo of creation. No instrument could measure it. No ship could approach without dissolving into madness. It pulsed with the heartbeat of everything the galaxy had, forgotten. Immortality born not of wisdom, but of noise. On the outskirts of its influence, small wars began to change. Orcs that once fought for sport now seemed to fight with purpose, though they could not have explained what that purpose was. When they roared into battle, the green star flared brighter, as though feeding on their joy. Their enemies, humans, Eldar, even Necrons, felt it too, the strange pull that came with each Orc victory. The laughter echoed through the warp, fracturing psychic barriers, warping the minds of those who listened too long. It became impossible to kill them in spirit. Even when their bodies died, the sound of them lingered, whispering through dust and shadow. We still hear. Far from the front lines, deep within an Imperial Archive world, a human astropath named Virene began receiving dreams she could not banish. She saw endless green fields under black skies, heard voices laughing without breath. She saw a single figure, an orc perhaps, but his eyes were not those of a beast. They glowed with the light of reason, old and tired. "You don't remember us," the dream said, its words carved into her skull. "But you live because we fell." She woke screaming each night, the smell of smoke and oil in her nostrils, the echo of the green star in her blood. She tried to report it to her superiors, but by the third night, she stopped speaking human words entirely. When they found her, she was painting glyphs on the walls, symbols no Imperial lexicon could translate, but which the Orcs would have recognized immediately. In the void beyond the Great Rift, the Necrons rebuilt. Their dynasties had fallen silent again after the catastrophe on Daggorath, but the echoes of that laughter remained even within their circuits. Akhetraz's memory lived on in fragments within the data vaults of his tomb complex. Each time his successors accessed his recordings, they found corruption, lines of code rewritten into rhythmic pulses. They tried to erase them, but the pulse returned, syncing with the energy of their dynastic cores. It was the same rhythm that now pulsed in every Orc's blood, a living contagion made of sound. And somewhere between the stars, in the endless dark that separated galaxies, a shape drifted, a remnant of Nthurl's final consciousness. Once a being of flesh and light, now nothing but memory caught in the warp's tide. It watched the green star from afar, its voice a whisper lost between seconds. "They are what we made," it murmured. "They have surpassed the gods." Yet there was no sorrow in the voice, only weary awe. The laughter of his creations had reached even him, folding eternity into a single, endless moment of recognition. Back within the galaxy, the green star began to change. Its surface rippled like liquid thought. Beings who gazed into it claimed they saw faces forming within, shifting, countless, each one smiling. Fleets sent to study it vanished without signal. Planets caught in its light began to mutate, their ecosystems transforming into vast fungal jungles. From the soil rose Orcs by the millions, born fully armed, their first breaths laughter. Some planets collapsed under their own psychic weight, their cores resonating with the hum of battle. Others became shrines, worshipped by the Orcs as proof that their gods were real, living and laughing through them. It was during this era that the first human chroniclers began to record the truth no one wanted to accept, that the Orcs were not merely another Xenos species, but the oldest echo of creation. They had survived where gods and empires had died, their simplicity masking the genius of their design. They could not be erased because they were built from the very fabric of life's refusal to end. A race of immortals forged not by technology, but by intent, To destroy them would mean silencing the laughter of existence itself, and nothing in the galaxy, not even the void, could bear such silence. In time, the green star dimmed, but it never truly faded. Its light scattered across the stars, embedding itself in the warp currents and psychic storms. It lived in the hearts of every orc who shouted before a fight, in every spark that leapt from their crude machinery. It hummed through the void, reminding the galaxy that creation was not sacred. It was absurd, and that absurdity was divine. Some say the green star still watches from the edge of time, waiting for the last war to end, though such an end may never come. Others say it was never a star at all, but the soul of the universe finally learning to laugh at itself. And if you listen close enough, across the static of a dying transmission or the hum of a distant warp storm, you might still hear it, the faintest echo of that eternal sound, older than gods, older than death, the laughter of life refusing to die. The universe had begun to hum with the rhythm of orc laughter, a pulse that reverberated through warp and matter alike. Whole systems seemed to vibrate in resonance, and the Necron dynasties that had once ruled silently now stirred uneasily in their tombs. The green star's influence reached further than any warlord could chart. It had become a living network, a psychic web connecting every orc to the echoes of its forgotten past. Those who sensed it felt exhilaration and fear intertwined, an instinctual recognition that they were witnessing something older than any star, something that defied death itself. Grok, the shaman, who had first heard the remnants of Unthural's voice, felt the hum within his bones. It had grown over centuries, fed by the collective joy and rage of billions. He stood on a plateau of jagged metal, watching his tribe prepare for a war they did not yet understand. "They all feel it now," he murmured. His voice carried on the wind, vibrating with energy. "It's in the fighting, in the laughing, in the building. It's in us." The other orcs looked to him, their faces painted with crude glyphs and streaks of green, eyes wide, not with comprehension, but with instinctual certainty. They followed his lead, though no one could articulate why. They were united, bound by the pulse of the green star, yet still wholly orc, unthinking, unrelenting, unstoppable. In the void above, Skarog's fleet circled like a swarm of predatory insects. The warlord stood at the helm of his flagship, a massive construct fused from stone, metal, and the bones of fallen enemies. The hum of the green star resonated through the hull, vibrating against his chest, reminding him of battles fought long before his first breath. "It's calling us again," he said, his voice rough and deep, carrying over the roar of engines. "Not for fighting, not yet, but it's waking something up." The crew of orcs cheered, without understanding. Their instinct for war merged with the rising tension in the psychic tide. Deep within the warp, Enthural's fragmented consciousness stirred once more. He was not whole, not alive in any human sense, but the pulse of the orcs reached him as clearly as if it had been his own heartbeat. He saw visions of fleets gathering, of tribes assembling, of war bands converging on distant worlds, drawn toward the star that had birthed their collective madness. "So they remember," he whispered to himself, though the sound was swallowed by the storm of warp currents. "Even fragmented, even broken, they remember." His memory brushed against the minds of the orcs, weaving fragments of his intent into their instinct. The laughter of the Krork, the joy of survival, the refusal to die. It became encoded into the very marrow of their bones. On the battlefield of a shattered moon, orcs collided with one another in chaos that was both play and ritual. Each warband believed they were fighting for dominance, yet in truth, they were contributing to the pulse of the Green Star. Every explosion, every roar, every swing of a crude weapon fed into the psychic resonance, amplifying the connection between the living orcs and the echo of their maker. Grok walked among them, feeling the hum deepen. The battlefield was no longer merely matter. It had become energy, a conduit for memory and instinct. Here, creation and destruction were inseparable, each act a note in a symphony older than time. Skarog descended onto the moon's surface, his bulk dwarfing even the largest orcs among him. He laughed, a sound that shook the air and reverberated through the wreckage. "Day's all ours," he shouted, though his voice carried beyond comprehension. "They fight, they die, they come back, and we's the reason why." He lifted his claw, pointing toward the void, toward the distant glow of the Green Star. The energy there pulsed in answer, wrapping the moon in green light. For a moment, the orcs paused, their instincts recognizing not just their gods, but the echo of something that had created even their gods. Then the sky above broke into motion. Swarms of orcs from other worlds appeared, drawn by the pulse of energy. They did not hesitate, did not ask for orders. They simply acted, synchronized without knowing the source. The battlefield became a living organism, moving with a rhythm that was both mechanical and organic, chaotic and precise. Grok realized that this was more than a battle. It was communion, a merging of instinct, memory, and psychic force into a singular purpose. The orcs were no longer separate tribes. They were a gestalt, an extension of the Green Star itself. And somewhere in the warp, Enthural's fragmented mind watched it all. He had not intended this. He had not imagined that his creations could become gods in their own right, that their laughter could shape the fabric of reality. Yet here it was, living, breathing, unyielding. His influence, broken and incomplete, flowed through them like a river of green light. He whispered into the pulse, not commanding, but observing, learning what it meant to create a life that refused to die, a joy that refused to end. The orcs, unknowingly, had become the ultimate testament to his existence. As the sun of the shattered moon rose, bleeding light across the battlefield, the orcs paused, not in fear, nor in comprehension, but in recognition of the force that had guided them, fragmented though it was. They roared in unison, a sound that echoed into the void and across the stars, carrying the resonance of creation itself. It was laughter, it was war, it was memory, it was life refusing to end. And in that moment, the galaxy knew once more that the orcs were not merely survivors. They were immortality incarnate, the heartbeat of a universe that would never quiet. In the centuries that followed, the galaxy fell into a rhythm shaped by noise and silence. The Green Star, though dimmed, remained visible from 1,000 worlds, a scar of emerald light etched across the heavens. The Imperium's ships charted it as a navigational anomaly. The Eldar called it a curse. The Necrons recorded it as an error in their memory of the universe. But to the Orks, it was home, a beacon of endless motion, the promise that every war led back to the beginning. The laughter it once unleashed had become the music of the cosmos, so constant that even void itself seemed to breathe in time with it. Grok's tribe had grown beyond number. His name became legend, though he had long since forgotten who he was. He wandered from battlefield to battlefield, following the pulse of the Green Star wherever it called. To him it was not just light, it was a voice, a presence speaking in vibration and sound. Some nights, when the winds quieted, He heard words buried beneath the noise. We are not gone. The message carried no origin, no language, just the sensation of recognition. He felt it in his bones and in the metal of his weapons. When he struck, he imagined the universe itself striking with him. On the edge of the segmentum obscurus, Skarog's fleet carved its name into the dark. His ships drifted between nebulae like shadows of gods, engines rumbling with the laughter of millions. Time had stripped away all sense of purpose, leaving only hunger. Each war, each conquest, each defeat bled into the next until history itself seemed circular. There was no past or future anymore, only repetition. Yet Skarog had begun to feel something new. The laughter no longer filled him as it once had. In quiet moments, when the void pressed too close, he felt the weight of stillness creeping in. He wondered if even immortality could decay. Then, one night, the stars changed. It began as a shimmer across the void, subtle at first, then swelling into motion. The green star pulsed again, brighter than it had been in ages. Across the galaxy, Orks lifted their heads, instinctively roaring in unison. Every world trembled under the psychic pressure. Spores burst in the millions. On human outposts, machines shorted from the surge. The warp itself rippled, parting like a curtain. The green star was opening. From within its core emerged shapes vast and luminous, neither physical nor wholly immaterial. They resembled the Krork of the ancient age, but magnified beyond comprehension. Beings of muscle, light and memory, their eyes burning with the color of new suns. They did not speak, for words were too small. They resonated, and through that resonance, all Orks heard the same thought, shared across every world and mind. We never died. We only forgot what we were. On the bridge of his flagship, Skarog fell to his knees. Around him, the Orks howled in ecstasy, overcome by the returning tide. The energy burned through them, rewriting their flesh, reforging their souls. The gods Gork and Mork, long believed to dwell only in imagination, now revealed themselves as reflections, fragments of a greater whole, made real by faith's persistence. The Krork reborn were neither gods nor ghosts, but continuity itself, the culmination of laughter's endurance. Grok stood beneath alien skies, watching auroras of green fire sweep across the horizon. He saw them descending through atmosphere, titans of the first age stepping once more into reality. One bent low, its face vast as a moon. Its gaze fell upon him. For an instant Grok saw everything, the war in heaven, and Thurl's trembling hands, the first Krork rising from the mud, the centuries of battle that followed. He saw the truth. That creation had never been a plan, only a refusal to end. He began to laugh, softly at first, then louder, until tears cut lines through the dust on his face. The giant smiled and touched a finger to the ground. The soil ignited in green flame. From that moment, the galaxy changed. The Orks fought still, but now their war carried something divine. They waged it not for territory, not even for joy, but as an act of remembrance. Each explosion, each roar, each charge across a burning field was a hymn to the eternal cycle of creation. The Krork walked among them like silent guardians, their laughter deeper, slower, echoing through matter and time. Whole star systems turned into living cathedrals of battle, their orbiting moons painted with crude glyphs that spelled one word: forever. Skarog lived long enough to see the green star fade at last, consumed by its own brilliance. He smiled as the light dimmed, knowing it had not died but merely moved on, scattering itself through every Ork mind in existence. "We ain't going nowhere," he said quietly. his last words lost beneath the roar of the engines. And somewhere beyond the dying galaxies, Thurl's voice stirred once more, faint and content. They learned what I never could. The universe was quiet for a single breath. Then came laughter, rolling through every corner of existence, soft and eternal, a sound older than death, purer than God's. It was not the laughter of victory or madness, but of acceptance, of being, the laughter of creation understanding itself at last. A new age began in silence. The green star was gone, its light absorbed into the veins of the universe, but its pulse endured in the fabric of everything that lived, died, or dreamed. The Orks no longer looked upward. They no longer needed to. The gods were within them now, their laughter resonating through every heartbeat, every swing of an axe, every explosion that split the void. Even the warp had changed, its storms tinted with faint green light, humming to the rhythm of endless creation. Worlds once dead now grew forests of metal and fungus, planets sprouting cities that built themselves in cycles of destruction and rebirth. The galaxy had accepted its inheritance, life that refused stillness, purpose that transcended meaning. In the deep dark between the stars, where light faltered and memory dissolved, Thurl drifted, his remnants sustained by the current of the laughter he had unleashed. He had long abandoned thought, but not awareness. He felt the universe breathing through him, each pulse a ripple of energy that carried the sound of creation itself. He could no longer tell where he ended and where his children began. Every Ork was a fragment of his design, every war a verse of the same song. He had once built life to preserve order. Now it thrived by rejecting it. The irony no longer pained him. It was beautiful in its defiance. Far away, on a world of shifting sands and fractured moons, Grok's tribe stood before the ruins of an ancient temple, the last surviving architecture of the old ones. The carvings were worn and broken, but even in ruin, they glowed faintly, responding to the presence of Ork blood. Grok traced the symbols with a calloused hand. He could not read them, yet something in him understood. "We've been here before," he murmured. The others gathered behind him, silent for once. The air vibrated with memory. He could almost see the ghosts of the past, the old ones, in there. Radiant forms, the first Krork roaring into being, the fall, the laughter. The temple was not a relic. It was a mirror, showing them what they had always been. That night, the stars above shifted, aligning for the first time in 10,000 years. The constellations formed the faint shape of a grin, stretching from horizon to horizon. The Orks saw it and fell to their knees, not in worship, but in recognition. The Krork were watching again, their shadows lingering in the glow of the cosmos. Grok felt the pulse of their presence, vast and patient. "Days waiting," he whispered. "Days listening to us fight." He looked up at the stars and laughed until his voice broke. His laughter spread, rolling across the plains like thunder, rising into the upper atmosphere, blending with the hum of the warp. Across the galaxy, other tribes heard it, an echo carried not by sound but by connection. Millions of Orks began to laugh without knowing why, their voices merging into one colossal vibration. The psychic field around them thickened, the air rippling with green light. For a fleeting moment, the material and immaterial fused once more. The Krork answered, not with words but with presence. Vast silhouettes appeared in the warp, towering forms of radiant green fire, smiling down upon their descendants. They did not command, did not bless. They simply existed, reflections of what had always been true. The Orks were not the children of gods. They were the continuation of them. On the far edge of the galaxy, a Necron world went dark, its command protocols, untouched for aeons, suddenly filled with corrupted data. Laughter echoed through its data cores, fracturing every logic matrix, infecting the code with rhythm. A single command repeated endlessly. They live, they live, they live. The planet's crust split apart as the stored energy of ages released in a surge of green light. From its heart, spores emerged, drifting into space, carried by radiation and solar winds. Even the machine gods could not resist the contagion of life. In the void above, Skarog's ship sailed endlessly, now more monument than vessel. He sat upon its bridge, older than memory but unchanged by time. The stars around him flickered to the rhythm of the Ork pulse, a symphony only he could truly hear. "It never stops," he said softly, voice rough with centuries. "And that's the point." His laughter started as a rumble, low and distant, then grew, echoing through the halls, shaking the hull, spreading into the void. The ship laughed with him, its engines roaring back to life. As the universe listened, the pulse of green light quickened again. Somewhere deep in the warp, the fragments of Nthurul's essence dissolved fully into the living current. He did not vanish. He became what he had always sought to understand, the continuation of life without end. His laughter joined the countless others, indistinguishable now from the Ork's eternal joy. The galaxy turned, vast and infinite, its stars trembling with the rhythm of existence. In the final moment before dawn broke across another nameless world, Grok looked to the sky. The grin of stars faded, replaced by a single green shimmer. He knew it was not farewell but reminder. "We're still here," he said, smiling. "Always was. Always will be." Around him the Orks laughed and built and fought and sang, their lives burning bright and brief, yet unending. Above them, unseen but ever present, the universe itself laughed back, a sound that filled the void, resonating through eternity, carrying the truth that life's greatest strength was its refusal to fall silent. There came a time when even the stars seemed to slow their burning, as though listening. The laughter that had once been a roar across the galaxy now flowed like an ancient river, so constant that silence itself began to sound unnatural. Planets born from the ashes of old wars thrived in paradoxical peace. Orks building cities only to tear them down, forging weapons only to melt them again. Yet beneath the endless rhythm of creation and destruction, something subtle was changing. The pulse of the green star had begun to stretch, like the breath before a great exhalation. It was not fading, it was preparing. On the world of Drega's Fall, a wasteland of rusted mountains and glowing dust, the skies had turned permanently green. Storms of light rolled over the horizon, scattering lightning that hummed with the tone of ancient voices. Grok stood on a cliff overlooking the plains, his face weathered by centuries of war and laughter. Around him, the tribes gathered, their banners fluttering in a wind that smelled of metal and rain. The ground beneath their boots pulsed with a heartbeat that did not belong to the planet. He knew what it was. "It's waking again," he said quietly. "The big one. The heart of it all." Across the galaxy, the same realization dawned in different forms. On distant battlefields, Orks stopped mid-fight to look skyward. On forgotten moons, spores stirred beneath ancient stone. Even in the warp, where thought and reality merged, the echoes of Nthurul's essence stirred once more. The universe itself seemed to draw breath. For those who could sense such things, the psychers, the prophets, the machines, the air was thick with expectancy. The laughter was about to change. Deep within the immaterium, where light and memory intertwined, the shape of the green star reformed, not as fire or energy, but as a voice, vast and unending. It called to the Orks through instinct, through their shared bond of chaos and joy. The call was not of command, but of invitation, and they answered as one. Fleets launched from every world, crude engines roaring with faith. Millions of ships drifted through storms and void, converging on the same destination, the center of the galaxy, where the first Krork had been born. Skarog's ship, old as myth, led the armada. He stood at its bow, the void stretching before him like an ocean of memory. He could feel the pull deep within his bones. "We's going home," he said, though none remembered what that meant. The fleet moved through warp and real space alike, the lines between them collapsing under the pressure of their collective will. To the few who watched from afar, it looked as though a wound had opened in the galaxy, a spiral of green light spinning toward the core. When they arrived, they found no star, no world, no throne, only emptiness. Yet the emptiness was alive, vibrating with potential. The Krork awaited them there, vast forms of energy coalesced from memory and belief. They towered above the fleet like gods reborn. Their laughter was low and resonant, shaking space itself. The Orks stared in awe, but none bowed. They knew instinctively that these beings were not masters, but mirrors. The Krork spoke not in words, but in emotion, waves of warmth and recognition that spread through every Ork mind. "You have become what we could not. You have remembered what we forgot." Skarog laughed until tears burned his eyes. "We ain't remembering," he said aloud. "We are it." His voice carried across every ship, every mind. Grok felt it too, the merging of past and present, of maker and made. The Orks' laughter joined the Krork's, and the sound became a force, expanding outward until it filled the galaxy. Stars flared in response, their light bending around the echo of that joy. Even the warp fell still for a heartbeat, as if listening to the universe speak its own name. Then came the transformation. The Orks and Krork, bound by laughter, began to merge, not as flesh or machine, but as energy, color, sound. The fleet dissolved into rivers of green fire, each spark carrying memory, emotion, and will. They streamed into the void, forming a single colossal shape that stretched from one arm of the galaxy to the other. It was neither creature nor god, but the embodiment of continuity, life eternal, refusing stillness, rewriting reality with joy. At its center, Enthuril awoke fully. He did not appear as a figure of light or shadow, but as awareness, the quiet between laughs, the intention within chaos. For the first time, he saw his creation as it truly was. Not a mistake, not a weapon, but an answer. The universe did not need order or perfection. It needed persistence. It needed to laugh in the face of its own fragility. He let go of all guilt and became one with the chorus, his final thought echoing across the stars. Creation never ends. It only changes shape. When the light faded, the galaxy was silent again. But it was not the silence of death. It was the breath after laughter, the calm before a new beginning. Across countless worlds, spores took root once more, glowing faintly with the memory of what had been. And when the first Ork of the new age opened its eyes and laughed, the sound was not a beginning or an ending. It was everything in between. The light of the green star was gone, yet its shadow lingered, imprinted upon the fabric of existence like laughter carved into stone. Millennia passed without count. The galaxy rebuilt itself from ruin and memory, empires rising from the ashes of forgotten wars. Humanity spread like wildfire through the stars, never knowing whose echoes they walked upon. Their priests spoke of divine order, their scholars of logic and destiny, but none could explain the faint hum that filled the quiet between the worlds, the pulse that refused to fade. It beat beneath the static of radio waves, whispered through cosmic storms, and trembled faintly in the silence of prayer. The laughter had become the universe's heartbeat. On a remote planet at the edge of mapped space, a storm gathered. The world was unremarkable, rock, sand, and thin air, but its sky shimmered with a soft green aurora. Beneath that light stood a single figure, alone among ruins that had no record in any archive. It was Grok, though time had stripped him of name and form. His body was ancient but ageless, a vessel for memory. The laughter still lived within him, but now it was quiet, patient, like an ember waiting for wind. He had seen empires rise and fall, watched suns die, and still he walked, guided by the echo of what had once been. Tonight, the hum beneath his feet grew stronger. Something was awakening. The ground split open, revealing a chamber of living metal. Inside, a faint light pulsed, a relic of the Krork, preserved through the ages. Grok descended slowly, the air thick with the scent of dust and ozone. At the center of the chamber stood a sphere of translucent stone, its surface etched with spirals that pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. He touched it, and the world fell away. In an instant, he stood once more within the endless green. The void stretched in all directions, filled with faces he knew yet could not name. They were the Krork, the old ones, the reflections of himself across eternity. And in the center of it all was the presence of Unthurl, no longer fragmented, no longer alone. "You found it," the voice said, warm as sunlight, vast as the stars. Grok felt tears form in eyes that had forgotten how to cry. "Was I meant to?" he asked, his voice small against the immensity. "You were meant to be," Unthurl replied. "That was always enough." The void shifted, and images unfolded. Wars of ages passed, laughter rising over silence, the cycle of creation without end. "Why me?" Grok asked, though he already knew the answer. "Because you listened," said the voice. "When all others forgot, you remembered the sound of life itself." The green light brightened, surrounding him until there was no distinction between thought and being. "And now," he whispered, "now you will return it." When Grok opened his eyes, the chamber glowed brighter than before. The sphere's light flowed into him, coursing through his veins, turning his blood to emerald fire. He felt his memories unravel and reform, merging with those of every Ork that had ever lived. He saw through 1,000 eyes, heard through 1,000,000 voices. Across the galaxy, the Orks stirred as one, feeling a pull they did not understand. Their laughter grew louder, rising like thunder. On battlefields and forgotten worlds alike, they looked to the sky, sensing something vast returning to them. The hum deepened. The planet trembled. The air itself became alive with motion. From the heart of the storm above, light descended, a column of emerald flame connecting heaven and earth. It was not destruction, but renewal. Where it touched, the ground bloomed with life. Iron trees, glowing fungus, rivers that sang as they flowed. The ruins rebuilt themselves in spirals of living metal, rising into towers that reached for the stars. The Orks across the galaxy felt it in their bones. "It's happening," one shouted through tears of joy. "The laugh's coming back." Grok stood at the center of it all, his body dissolving into light. He was not dying, he was becoming. The pulse of the green star flowed through him, out into the universe once more. He could feel the laughter spreading, awakening worlds long silent, weaving joy and chaos into every atom. He saw Skarog again, his grin shining like a star, and heard the voices of all who had come before him. And Thirl's voice was the last to fade. "The first laugh was mine," it said, "but the last belongs to you." The light burst outward, sweeping through the galaxy like dawn. Stars flared and dimmed in rhythm. Nebulae twisted into vast spirals of green, and for a single eternal moment, every being, human, orc, elder, machine, felt the same thing, an echo of warmth, of life remembering itself. Then it was gone. When the light faded, Grok was no longer there. In his place, a single seed lay at the chamber's center, glowing faintly with green fire. The wind carried it upward, out through the cracks in the world, into the waiting void. It drifted between stars across centuries, until it found a place to rest. A barren rock, cold and silent. The soil stirred. Something small and green pushed through the dust, its first breath a laugh. The galaxy turned once more, bathed in faint green light. Somewhere far beyond, the pulse began again, quiet but steady, eternal. Creation inhaled, existence exhaled, and in that breath, the universe laughed, because it was alive. The end.